Good morning, and welcome to day 2 of planning and eating your previously off-limits foods. I'm calling this series Normalise because it's all about a process of normalising those foods which we've given a lot of special powers to, right? A lot of extra magnetism that makes us think we can't handle ourselves around them. There's something about them. There's nothing about them apart from our history with them and our thoughts around them and how we've used them emotionally again and again and again. So today I'd like you to plan your foods. Yeah, post-it note planning is fine, and I urge you to plan to eat them in front of other people so that they are non-secret. I made this mistake this morning. I planned to have some bread and butter and jam after lunch. I got hungry at breakfast time, and there was a crust lying around after the kids had gone out, and the relief of them all going to school. And I realised that bread was extra super salty that I'd made in the bread machine, and I love salty flavours, and I justified to myself that I could eat it now because it was on the plan for later. So that's a thought error that I'm going to be looking out for later. That idea of I can eat it early, rather than following the plan that I've made 100%. And that meant that I was eating it whilst my husband was taking the kids to school and the house was empty. So there's nobody watching me. Now, I did manage to make myself sit down to eat it. But I was still looking at my phone whilst I was eating it. And then, of course, I wanted more than the planned amount. And I ate more. I went and got the bread out of the bread bin, and I had more bread and butter. It was super delicious. And I noticed that I was continuing to eat it because I was looking for an experience of pleasure from it. And the pleasure that I was getting from it was diluted. And I had to keep eating it to try and find that experience of pleasure because my emotional state was very guilty. And I think that my emotional state was quite guilty. Like, it's kind of hard to tell, isn't it? Because I was feeling in betrayal of myself because I'd eaten early. And I knew that if my husband saw me eating it, he'd be quite surprised and probably comment because it was unusual for me to sit down with slabs of bread and butter in front of him. And so there was an element of guilt. So the guilt was coming from several places. The guilt was coming from eating out of alignment with my plan, eating privately, and eating more than my designated amount. But I think there was a fourth thing, and I think this is the really important thing. I think I felt a little guilty about eating it because of what it is, because I feel guilty about that food. Now, the last couple of days that I've eaten it, I wouldn't say I've been completely normal about it. I took bread, butter and jam with me as planned on a picnic yesterday. I made more than I needed. And then, as I was the only one who wanted to eat it, in order to try and normalise it, I tried to offer it to everybody all the freaking day. Whenever the kids were like a bit grumpy, I was like, "Are you hungry? Would you like a jam sandwich?" So I was trying to get other people to collude with me in a way. Even though I planned it, I was still feeling like it was a bit weird and odd and not normal. And I couldn't make it normal. Now, realising that normal is a thought that we're having, right? So if I'm eating something and I'm thinking, oh, this is really a real exception, or I've got to justify this to other people, or I've got to justify this to myself, that's not going to feel normal. That's going to feel like there's a lot of cognitive work going on trying to make up for the dissonance. So I think that over the course of this week, we'll start to bring in some, like intentionally, some thoughts of acceptance around these foods. I think that's my next step tomorrow. But for all of you today, as you're eating those foods, if you are experiencing guilt as you are eating them, even having planned and really decided to give yourself permission to eat them, really notice where that guilt is coming from and strategize around it for tomorrow to avoid it recurring, so that you're diminishing the guilt as you go along. So for example, tomorrow I can strategize to eat in full view of my husband. For example, if I eat it after lunch, he'll be there. I can also make a really clear decision and commitment to eat exactly the amount that I've chosen to eat. And that may mean that I sit there after the first slice and be like, well, that was so delicious, I want more. But it doesn't mean I have to act on it. And the second thing I could strategize around would be like preparing some replies to my brain when it says it doesn't matter, you can just eat it right away because it's on the plan for later. And to really prepare a thought for myself, which is along the lines of, I'll feel better about this if I eat it later, and not responding to minute by minute urges is a skill I'm working on. So I can tell myself that, and that will help me hold until later. But I want you to notice any other feelings that are coming up around those, eating those foods as well. Like, is it really different to eat them in a planned way as opposed to the way that you would normally eat them emotionally? For example, when would you normally reach for those foods? When you're feeling what? And is it different to eat them out of context, out of emotional context? Or are you finding that echoes of those emotions are coming to you as you're eating them, almost by association? I'd be really curious to know. So you can put all of that into the comments, or you can bring it to your one-to-one coaching sessions with me if you're one of my one-to-one clients. And if you're in my wider community and you're following this right now, you can really reflect on that stuff. And if any of that gives you a lot of thoughts that you would like to talk through, and you think that coaching might be the way forward for you, of course you're free to book a free consultation call with me and discuss private coaching as well. Yeah. All right. Well, I hope that has been helpful to you. I'll be really curious to see how it's going for you guys. Remember that we're learning. Remember that we're figuring this out. Remember that we're experimenting, and that in the past we've rejected our entire relationship with these foods. So, normalizing them is just by being honest with ourselves about them and bringing awareness to the eating of them. We're already bringing all of that stuff that we've been pushing out of our heads into plain sight and normalizing it by looking at it and saying, okay, well, what is it that I am actually doing psychologically, physically, practically? Yeah, how is this actually working for me? Lots of love. Bye-bye.